The small Cessna was shaking violently, alarms blaring, and everyone on board could feel the panic rising. Outside, the sky had turned into a blur of clouds, and the ground seemed impossibly far away. Fear gripped every passenger, each heartbeat louder than the engine's roar. But in the middle of the chaos, one unexpected figure stepped forward, a young waitress, her hands trembling but her eyes sharp, holding the microphone she had picked up from the small PA system. No one expected her to do anything more than scream, but something inside her refused to give in to fear. As the plane pitched and jolted, she opened her mouth, and what came out stunned everyone. Calm, clear, and commanding. Her voice cut through the screaming and the panic, reaching every corner of the cabin. In that moment, she wasn't just a waitress, she was someone who could change what felt like an impossible situation. Passengers glanced at each other, unsure if this was hope or just another desperate attempt. The pilots were struggling, the engines groaning, and the tension was so thick it felt like it could snap at any second. Yet the words she spoke, the way she carried herself, made everyone pause, hanging on to every instruction and every sound. But just as the passengers began to sense a fragile sense of control, the plane lurched violently, throwing everything into uncertainty. What she did next would leave everyone questioning everything they thought they knew about courage and survival. The passengers couldn't take their eyes off her. The waitress whose name they barely knew. Just hours before, she had been serving coffee and sandwiches at a tiny airport diner, joking with travelers and wiping tables. No one would have imagined that the same hands that poured lattes could soon be holding the fragile lives of dozens in her grasp. Her calm voice over the microphone seemed impossible, like she was drawing strength from somewhere beyond herself. As the plane continued to tremble, fragments of her story started to surface. She had grown up around small aircraft, her father a flight instructor who had taught her the basics of aviation long before she ever carried a tray. But it wasn't just training, it was a sense of presence, a way of staying grounded even when everything around her threatened to spiral out of control. Passengers began to notice the way she moved with purpose, stepping past fear as if it were an obstacle she had already anticipated. Meanwhile, the pilots were fighting to regain control, their hands gripping the yoke with white-knuckled intensity. The engines sputtered, each sound a warning that the plane was losing its fight against gravity. The passengers' eyes darted between the cockpit and the young waitress. Torn between hope and terror, some whispered prayers, others gripped the seats. But all were united by one thought. Could someone so ordinary really hold the line between survival and disaster? And then, as the plane dipped sharply, the microphone in her hand seemed to become more than a tool, it felt like a lifeline. But would it be enough to keep everyone alive? The turbulence worsened, tossing the passengers like rat dolls, and the roar of the engines filled the cabin with a deafening urgency. In the cockpit, the pilots were pale, sweat streaking their foreheads as they fought to stabilize the Cessna. Every sudden dip and lurch reminded everyone on board that the plane was a fragile shell, suspended between survival and disaster. But amid the chaos, the waitress remained a beacon of focus, her voice steady as she guided terrified travelers through emergency procedures. She had learned from years of shadowing her father at small airfields. In the back, a young mother clutched her child, whispering reassurances she didn't feel, while a businessman muttered under his breath, cursing their luck and praying for a miracle. Each passenger's fear was different, yet it all collided in the cramped cabin, amplified by the uncertainty of what would happen next. Some were panicked, some numb, and a few even tried to make light of the situation, cracking nervous jokes that barely rose above the roar. Meanwhile, the waitress moved from one end of the cabin to the other, checking that passengers were buckled, calming cries, and giving clear, concise instructions over the microphone. Her actions revealed not just courage, but a deep empathy, a willingness to shoulder responsibility in a moment no one expected her to lead. Even as her voice carried reassurance, the plane's instruments flickered, warning lights flashing like urgent signals of an impending disaster. The passengers were caught in a tense limbo, hope clashing with fear, trust in the stranger who had taken control, and the harsh reality of a Cessna struggling against the storm. And then, without warning, the plane shuddered violently, sending a chilling thought through everyone's mind. Was this the moment everything could fall apart? The plane groaned as if protesting every movement, each jolt making hearts leap and stomachs twist. The passengers clung to their seats, knuckles white, eyes wide, as the storm outside battered the wings. Lightning flashed, illuminating terrified faces for brief, haunting moments, while the engines coughed and sputtered in protest. Every second felt stretched into an eternity. The small Cessna was no longer just a machine. It was a fragile cage holding dozens of lives in the balance. The waitress's voice, calm yet urgent, continued to guide everyone. She moved like a silent anchor amid the chaos, instructing passengers to brace for sudden drops, reassuring them with a tone that carried more authority than anyone could have imagined. Her hands were steady, though inside she felt a rush of fear she didn't dare show. Each command over the microphone was a lifeline, but she knew it might not be enough. In the cockpit, the pilots exchanged grim looks. The storm had thrown the plane far off course, instruments flickering wildly, and every maneuver seemed to bring only partial control. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, and the ground still seemed impossibly far away. Passengers whispered prayers or sobbed quietly, gripping each other, feeling the weight of helplessness settle in their chests. Suddenly, the Cessna dropped sharply, a violent motion that sent a collective scream through the cabin. Coffee cups flew, seatbelts strained, and panic surged like a wave threatening to drown every ounce of calm. The young mother clutched her child tighter. The businessman froze, eyes locked on the ceiling, and the waitress, microphone in hand, faced the full fury of the storm, knowing that the next moments could define whether anyone survived. Every second was a razor's edge, every movement critical, and the tension was unbearable. Just when it seemed the passengers were clinging to the thin thread of hope, a sudden jolt shook the Cessna harder than anything before. The left engine sputtered, coughing smoke, and a sharp warning light blinked violently on the control panel. The pilots' faces drained of color, and the storm outside seemed to intensify, rain pelting the windshield like shards of glass. Panic surged through the cabin anew, sharper this time, as everyone realized the danger was far from over. The young waitress's calm facade wavered for only a fraction of a second before she pushed it aside. She had kept the passengers focused, but now even she could feel the gravity of the situation deep in her chest. Her father's training had never covered this losing an engine mid-storm at altitude, but instinct and courage kicked in. She tightened her grip on the microphone and raised her voice, giving clear, commanding instructions, guiding passengers to prepare for a controlled brace. Then, an even more shocking twist unfolded. The cockpit door rattled violently, and a passenger, a man who had seemed panicked but quiet until now, lunged toward the controls, claiming he could help. Fear rippled through the cabin, and the pilots shouted, trying to regain authority, while the passengers gasped in disbelief. The sudden threat inside the plane collided with the storm outside, doubling the tension, and no one knew whose actions might save or doom them. The Cessna dipped again, tilting sharply, and the ground still seemed impossibly far away. Every heartbeat echoed like a drum of dread, every second stretching endlessly. The young waitress's voice cut through the chaos, but even her courage couldn't mask the terrifying truth. This was no ordinary emergency, and the plane's next move could decide everything. The plane shuddered violently one last time, tilting sharply as if testing everyone's resolve. The left engine had failed completely, smoke curling into the cabin, and the storm outside roared like a living beast. The pilots fought desperately at the controls, muscles straining, while the young waitress stood in the aisle, microphone in hand. Her voice cutting through the chaos with sharp, precise instructions. Passengers braced, clinging to seats and each other, hearts hammering with fear and hope intertwined. With one coordinated push, the pilots and the waitress guided everyone through a series of emergency maneuvers she had instinctively remembered from her father's lessons. She kept the passengers calm, directing them to secure their belts, adopt proper bracing positions, and remain focused despite the whiplashing turbulence. Every second was a test of nerves, but slowly, miraculously, the plane began to stabilize. The storm's fury still rattled the fuselage, yet the worst of the uncontrolled dips and spins seemed to ease. Then, just as relief began to whisper through the cabin, a flash of lightning illuminated the cockpit and revealed something no one expected. The man who had lunged for the controls was revealed to be a retired flight instructor, quietly guiding the pilots from the passenger side of the cockpit. His sudden intervention, combined with the waitress's,